Thanks, buddy. If a resume could be described as always in the wrong place at the wrong time, that's what Rosemary just told you. My name is Clint. I'm the director of the DC Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency, and I want to just start by saying the reason I do this job is because I believe in the power of government to be a force of good in people's lives, and I think after disasters is a great time to make sure we're doing our very best for people. So that one goes out to Chris from this morning for reminding us to lead with our why. Heather called me a few weeks ago and was like, hey, I got this slot. We want to talk about NSSEs, and can you do it? And I said, yeah, how long do I have? And she said, you got an hour, you can do whatever you want. So I'm going to try something new. I'm usually a bit of a babbler because I love this stuff, but I'm going to try to keep this to about 30 minutes. And you can either have it fast, cheap, or good. So I'm going to go with fast and cheap, which means I might lose some details. The other thing I want to acknowledge is that there are people in this room who have as much or more experience with national special security events, and I honor that. I had a 90-minute conversation last night with a few folks where they basically held me to task and walked me through the presentation. I had no notes and I had nothing. But there is a lot of wisdom in this room about this topic, and I want to honor that's in there, and I want to just say to them, I'm skipping a lot of stuff because I'm trying to stay under 30 minutes, okay? This concept, the concept for this presentation germinated last year, and I actually was hoping to bring this here next year, but I got the opportunity to bring it this year. So a lot of what I want to get from you all in the second half of this is the questions that you have based on what I'm talking about. But I'm going to start because I want to engage. You guys are the heroes of this story. So I want everybody to close their eyes for a second. Just close your eyes for a second. I want you to envision that you have a basket of eggs. These are not hard-boiled eggs. They are just eggs, the kind that break really easily, and they're sitting on the floor of your kitchen. And you have 3 toddlers in your kitchen, okay? You need these eggs because these eggs are dinner. You have to preserve these eggs. Think of all the ways that you're going to protect these eggs from these toddlers. Raise your hand. You can open your eyes. Raise your hand if I say something that you thought about doing to protect these eggs from these toddlers. Did anybody think, I'm going to tell the toddlers not to touch the eggs? Okay, we got one. Does anybody have toddlers currently in your house? What happens when you tell a toddler they can't do something? For lack of a better word, we're going to refer to them as terrorists for the moment. How many of you have said to your children, we don't negotiate with terrorists? And you were joking, but were you joking? So you can tell the toddlers not to touch the eggs, right? You can reason with the toddlers and say, if you touch the eggs and you break the eggs, now we don't have dinner, right? You could also move the eggs out of the way, right? You could remove the eggs from their reach. But we all have toddlers, and they might climb up on the table and get the eggs. You could build a little wall around the eggs, right? But you can't stop the toddler from getting in. The only thing you can do, really, to do this is not have the eggs out, right? But you got to put the eggs somewhere, and they've got to go on the floor. And I want you to keep that basic, simple model in mind as we talk about special events today. Because how many of you believe that in your communities, special events are a core part of your community's culture, activity, and economic drivers? I do. Huge economic driver for us, right? Which means we have to have the eggs. We have to have the special events. And today we're going to talk about a very special type of special event, one that gets way more resources than most special events do. I'm going to talk to you really quickly about why it's not possible to use that model to protect the eggs, to protect all the eggs everywhere, right? We can't protect the eggs in DC and the eggs in Monterey and the eggs in Texas and the eggs in Chicago because there's too many baskets of eggs. But what we can do is learn some lessons from each other and share them and do our best going forward. So I want to start with some, Velvet, am I clicking? Yep. I want to start with some audience interaction. But I first want to say that this presentation is brought to you by FIFA. And for those of you that think FIFA is the only game in town, we also have America 250, which is happening at the same time. So those are our presidentially approved special events that are the reason we're here today. And now what I want you to do is I want you to take out your phone, and I want you to take a little quick snapshot. I am told that this is an approved, cyber hygiene approved QR code. And I want you to tell me what this pictogram says. What does this pictogram mean to you? What was that one? After lunch, we sit and we get sleepy, which is why we're doing these. Do me a favor, spell out what you think NSSE means. You get bonus points, no prizes, but you get bonus points if you have any funny fails in there. Crickets, huh? There you go, NSSE, all right. Does anybody see those letters and say NSSE? I'll tell you a funny story. I joined my agency in 2017, and for the first 2 months, I joined right as the first Trump inauguration was happening, and I called them NSSEs because I always thought that we referred to them as NSSEs. And my special events lead, our special events lead, pulled me aside one day and said, "Don't say that anymore. You sound like a fool." I said, "What do you call them?" She says, "NSSEs." Okay. National Scented Socks Event, okay. National Special Security Events, National Special Security Event, National, good. So either there are a lot of people who know what these are, or you did the very little bit of light reading that I prescribed before we started. Thank you for that. How many NSSEs has the DHS Secretary designated? Because it is the DHS Secretary who has to designate National Special Security Events. And they can do that on their own, right? The federal interagency can recommend that an event reach this designation, or they can designate it at the request of a city or state. You're all over the spectrum. Okay, who went with 100? This is Price is Right rules, you lost. Who went with, did anybody go, who's got that spike right next to 80? Come on, don't be shy. Somebody put it in there. Okay, the actual number, give or take, is 89. 89 of these National Special Security events. I said 83. I went and recounted, it's actually 89. What percentage of the National Special Security events have taken place in Washington, D.C.? Remember, this one's a percentage. All right. Did anybody, who put in that spike in the 50 range right there? Who's contributing? There's multiple of you. You can all raise your hands. All right. Very nice. Right now, it's 55%. So 55% of the National Special Security events have happened in Washington, D.C. Once again, my whole resume is being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But that's because, and it's an important part of why NSSEs exist. So the purpose of NSSEs is to protect and prevent emergencies, and this is my shorthand, right? So I'm trying to distill this down. There's a full formal definition online at the DHS website that you can go check out. But the real purpose is to protect and prevent emergencies at events of national importance from acts of terrorism, okay? The DHS Secretary, either independently under the advisement of the federal agencies or in concert with a local jurisdiction, will designate an event as a national special security event because that event is an event of national importance. Think about all the special events that happen all around the country every single year. Tens of thousands. Tens of thousands of events go into the Department of Homeland Security's special event rating, And they get bucketed into what are called SEER ratings, or Special Event Assessment Rated Events. They start at 5, they work their way up to 1. 1 gets a little bit of extra support in the form of a federal coordinating official and potentially some direct federal assistance from like your law enforcement agencies and things like that. Then there's a bucket outside of the SEER ratings called National Special Security Events. And it's important to understand why these exist, because it's going to drive a lot of what from my perspective, are the takeaways about National Special Security Events. So again, we want to take an event of significant national importance, we want to protect it first and prevent emergencies at it, and generally speaking, we're doing that from acts of terrorism. We're not talking about man-made intentional threats, we're not talking about natural hazards, we're not talking about tech failure, although what we've learned over time is the prevention and protection aspects of our National Special Security Event planning does cover a lot of other aspects. There are 3 things primarily that at the very top level that a designation gets you. So when you get a designation for an NSSE, it formally activates the U.S. Secret Service as the lead agency. This is a legal and statutory authority that's assigned to the Secret Service, and they are now in charge of the NSSE security planning. They are not in charge of planning the event itself. And that's a really important designation. And it's something that matters to all of you in the room who have a hand in planning special events, okay? When we host the Africa Leaders Summit, right, we bring in leaders from all over the world. I say we as a community, I'm using the colloquial we. But when the federal government hosts the Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C., and brings in leaders from all over Africa, it's the State Department that actually owns the event. So the run of show for that event, the invitation list, all of the formal activities, the dinners, everything is all designed by the State Department in concert with the White House. What happens then is that event rises to the level of being an event of national importance, and then the Secret Service gets activated to lead the security planning for that event. So I want you to think of the event itself being run by the Department of State as that basket of eggs, right? They've got the basket of eggs. They choose how many eggs go in the basket. They choose how big the basket is. They choose if there's a basket at all. The service then comes in and partners with the FBI and FEMA and a whole bunch of other agencies, and we do everything that you did when you closed your eyes. They put the fence around it. They close the roadways. They put all of the functional prevention and protection and the management of consequences together so that that basket of eggs is protected, and if something goes wrong with that basket of eggs, there's a way to clean it up really, really quickly and save the eggs that are still in the basket. The FBI is activated if there's a crisis, so they're the lead agency for crisis, because what did I say about the designation? It's to prevent it from acts of terrorism, right? And the FBI statutorily is the lead agency for terrorism response and coordination. And then it activates FEMA. And FEMA is there to help coordinate all of the incoming other federal resources that could be brought in if we have to flip from event management into crisis management, which is how we stop the initial problem, into consequence management. And those 3 agencies work, let's say closely together, let's say generously closely together to put on the event. It also engages the entire federal interagency. So how many of you have been to like a local community event in your community lately? Right. Were there visiting dignitaries? Were there treaties being signed? Right? So totally logically, you're not seeing the Department of Energy there doing sweeps for highly energetic material. You're not seeing at every one of those special events an enhanced military presence for CBRNE response. You're not seeing that stuff, but for these events, you gotta have it. So it engages the feds, the states, and the locals, and most importantly, it mandates that the federal agencies contribute the full force and weight of their agencies, including their budgets, to supporting the event. And that is really important. I want you to keep that in mind because that is really, really essential when we start talking about risk management and protective decisions. It also structures mandatory interagency planning. Okay? So I just want to start. The way I structured this is I talk a little bit, I give you a lesson that I've learned the hard way over time, usually through making mistakes. One of the things that an NSSE designation gets you is clear leader's intent. It is the Homeland Security Secretary's direction to the Secret Service to secure this event. And they are a zero-fail agency, so they will not fail, which means everybody else has to act and behave and contribute the same way. It creates a formal, repeatable planning structure. I'm going to talk about the planning structure. It drove me nuts in the beginning. I've grown to really like it because it is formal and it is repeatable and it's understandable as long as you do a lot of them. So the service, who goes all over the country doing these, understands it really well. And a lot of their folks are interchangeable on this. And if you're like us and you have to do this sometimes 4 or 5 times a year, it makes a lot of sense. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the challenges with that as we go forward. But it also assigns federal agencies to participate and spend budgets. How many of you have actually tried to plan a special event in your local community and you start getting things from other agencies like, I don't know if we have the budget to do that, or I don't know if I can pay overtime for that, right? This eliminates all of that from a planning perspective. This says that we will protect these eggs. And we will do whatever is necessary to protect these eggs, and everybody will work together to protect these eggs. And I've done 17 of these. By this summer, I'll have done 19 of these. And while I think there's room for continued growth in the planning process, I have literally never seen people argue about the shared intent of an NSSE planning process. And as someone who's done a lot of planning, that's pretty unique, okay? How are NSSE structured? That's the next sort of thing I want you to understand, because the structure is both the power and the limitation of national special security events. So all NSSEs have an executive steering committee, and those executive steering committees meet. This is an example of the agencies on a standard executive steering committee for a national special security event in Washington, D.C. Your mileage may vary. If you're out in California and you're doing APEC last year or 2 years ago, you'd have a different list of names, but the same sorts of functions, right? It includes the 3 lead federal agencies. It includes a whole bunch of other federal agencies, and then it includes a bunch of local agencies. And remember I said that the NSSE designation compels the feds, states, and locals to work together. But can the feds really tell the locals that they have to work together? This is a federalism, right? This is a federalist country. I can only help you if I want to. But what it does do is it creates a planning structure that locals and states can plug into to support these operations. And what you see here is I've only got, I think, 3 or 4 of our city agencies listed. But this is just for the Executive Steering Committee. Our Department of Transportation is involved. Our Department of Human Services is involved. Our Department of Health is involved. But they're involved at the subcommittee level. And every NSSE Executive Steering Committee has a number of functional subcommittees. So let's go back to our Mentimeter and see how many functional subcommittees can you have. Oh, those are rookie numbers, y'all. You got to pump those up. All right. All right, somebody just landed on that 30. Who put the 30 in there? Velvet, it doesn't count if it was you because you knew the answer. Okay, so it's somewhere between 28 and 32. And the reason I say somewhere between 28 and 32 is because the service has actually been making adjustments over the last couple of years to how many subcommittees there are. And some of the changes are really, really smart, and they're based on what we've learned over the last couple of years with the nominating conventions for the Democratic and Republican parties, as well as some of the events we've had in D.C. Okay, what I want to talk to you about when it comes to the subcommittees is my second big lesson, and this was something I learned I thought, like, initially when I started working on these national special security events, I thought, like, this is an insane amount of resources. It's an insane amount of planning. It's an insane amount of agencies. It's insanely expensive, right? But when I started thinking about it from a risk management perspective, I kind of got to the bottom line, which is if you really truly want a safe and secure event, you have to invest in prevention and protection functions, right? So we talk about these things. We talk about cybersecurity. We've talked about UAS and counter UAS here, right? We've talked about, you know, great power competition. All of this is prevention and protection, right? All of this is about buying down our risk before an event happens. And one of the things that I think that I really like is that if you take the entire subcommittee list, which, pro tip, I'm not going to give you today, and I'm not even going to show you, you'll get an almost completely exhaustive list of prevention and protection functions for event planning, okay? The reason I'm not going to share that list with you is because that is the one thing that the Secret Service is like, please don't share that ever. But if you, as an event planner at your state and local level, were to reach out to the service, I'm sure that they would share that with you because it is a very, very effective list of functions that you want to think about, whether you're having an event in Winter Haven, Florida, or you're having the UN General Assembly in New York City. It includes things like defining a perimeter and having a team work on just protecting the perimeter. It includes transportation and movement of people, crowds and attendees. It includes things like UAS, airspace management, and counter UAS, right? So it looks at the entire event as a package of risks, and then it breaks each risk down into a functional area. And then remember all those agencies I listed, plus all the ones I said will still show up, even if they're not on the executive steering committee? All of those agencies add people to the different subcommittees, okay? And what that means is there's a huge amount of protective effort that goes into these events. And the benefit to you all, and to us, all who do special event planning and risk management for special event planning, is there's a template for this, right? The problem is it's 32 subcommittees, and it's a huge amount of agencies and a huge amount of resources. And the solutions they come up with are very big and very expensive. So you can't do it all the time, right? And that's why the National Special Security Event designation has to be used sparingly for events that present, by virtue of what they are and who's going to be there, the highest risk. So that's what I want you to take away from today is even though we won't be able to designate the vast, vast, vast majority of special events NSSEs, the best practices are out there if we continue to work together to pull them down and share them. The key, one of the key lessons I've learned from this process is balancing federal, state, and local agencies and the inputs based on authority, jurisdiction, and capability. The group that spoke this morning talked about emergency management being in a space where you're not duplicating anyone else's effort, right? You want to bump right up to it, you want to coordinate everybody's work, but you don't want to be doing something somebody else is doing. It's the same at the local and federal level. Even when you think about just law enforcement around a national special security event, right? We will have, you know, let's say we have 8, 9, 10 miles of NATO anti-scale fencing for an inauguration. We will literally put 10 miles, the service will put 10 miles of fencing, and then we will put law enforcement officers as watchstanders along that fence, right? Well, you got to look at who owns the jurisdiction where the fence is. You got to look at what capability do you need at that point. You got to look at who's got arrest powers and who's got deterrence powers. Can you just sub in some National Guard folks, right? Do they have to be armed? Do they not have to be armed, right? All of these questions come into play, and this is where I get to quote my favorite quote from one of my least favorite movies, which is, "This is your dance space, and this is my dance space." Anybody get that one? Yep, there, right there. The balance, it is a dance. It is a dance. Everybody has to be working in partnership to make this work. And that leads us to the planning process. Incidentally, this is a picture of me putting my notes together for this presentation. The planning process is actually pretty straightforward. We start with an executive steering kickoff meeting. There are generally 3 to 5 executive steering committee meetings that take place. One of the things that I really like about working with the service, especially over the last 5 years, is how iterative and evolutionarily focused the service has been about these planning processes, right? It's being driven by the number of events they've had to do. It's being driven by, in our case, some of the folks we have in certain seats. It's being driven by their lessons learned from events like the Butler, Pennsylvania shooting on the campaign trail with now President Trump. We used to do every subcommittee gave a brief out at every single meeting, okay? Can you imagine what 32 subcommittees worth of brief outs look like? One paragraph, one slide, they read the slide, they move on, right? Is that a collaborative planning process? It's a silo planning process. And what we've discovered over time really is that there are like 4 things that need to get worked out really early in the special event planning process to allow everybody else to do their job. 1 is the perimeter, 2 is transportation and movement, 3 is what we're doing for civil disturbance if it happens, and then access control and identity verification, right? We now spend the bulk of our time, and this is no different than any other event you're planning in your community. If you spend the bulk of your time looking at the shape and design of the event that the event organizer wants to have, and then the design of the initial security perimeter that you need to have around that event, everything else flows forth from that, right? So we spend a lot of time early in the process on maps, on perimeter design and things like that. And that is an iterative function that the service has implemented over the last few cycles that I think is really, really important. It drives all the other risk analysis for the event planning. We do a bunch of necessary subcommittee meetings. If you're on the local side, when you have, like I think last year we had 6 national special security events in like a 15-month period. And what that allows the service to do is that allows the service to flood the zone with agents, move the leadership around event for event, get people experience, but they're managing events all over the country. So they've got to be able to do this. But if you're the local, that means the same 9 people from your local jurisdiction do all the planning meetings, right? If there's a law enforcement subcommittee, if there's a subcommittee that's even tangentially related to law enforcement, it's going to be the same 3 folks from the Metropolitan Police Department doing that, right? And so one of the things we've seen is the subcommittee meetings over time have gotten tighter, they've gotten more focused, and they're I don't want to say that they're wash, rinse, and repeat, but they are covering the same material over and over, so it makes their subcommittee meeting processes much, much faster and more effective. And then finally, there's a big final ESC meeting, Executive Steering Committee meeting, where we review the plan. The plan is in air quotes, and I'm coming back to that in just a second. But you review the plan, which means that every subcommittee does give a brief out and says, this is what we're trying to do, this is how we're going to do it, do you have any questions? There are never any questions at this point. Because we save those questions for what we call a rehearsal of concepts drill. Now, not every NSSE gets a rehearsal of concepts drill. In the District of Columbia, we typically do them for the largest events, so inauguration, and some of our larger city events now get them. And a rehearsal of concepts drill is where you lay out what you think is supposed to happen with the event and with the security coverage for that event, and you walk through it in real time. And what you mostly make sure of is you don't have 2 people trying to do the same thing in the same space at the same time with different objectives, right? You can't have this road closure happening, but your fire folks say, but that's a running route for our ambulances. That's what the rehearsal of concepts is there to do. So I like to think of that as the forward-looking progress of the event, right? Then we do a tabletop exercise, and the tabletop exercise looks at it from the opposite perspective, which is, this is what you thought was going to happen, and then this is what happened. And that's where we do a more traditional tabletop exercise, where we think about what are all the contingencies that could happen that create consequences for us. This is where we put in things like mass casualty. This is where we put in things like terrorist activity. This is where we put in things like severe weather, right? Because it challenges us to flex, grow, shrink, and adjust our security posture in real time. And when you can do both of those, when you have the time for an event to do both the rehearsal of concepts and then the tabletop exercise, you get everybody who's participating gets a really, really fulsome view of what we're trying to do here. And then finally, the event takes place and you do an after-action meeting. Which brings me to lesson number 4, is this process works. It works really well. It is not an ICS incident action planning process. And so if you think you're going into this to do an ICS-based incident action planning process, if you come out of the police department or the fire department or emergency management, you might be steeped in the culture of ICS and NIMS. And what you have to think about as you do this is there is no one plan to to rule them all in one plan to bind them. So for my Lord of the Rings fans, just put that out of your head. It does not generate a single unified incident command structure. It does not create an ICS-based resource management process. It creates a process where the subcommittees define their resources and escalate them up through their committee chairs, who are always Secret Service and another agency, and then there's a single person at the top who binds them all up. Now, the service has gotten much, much better about resource management over the last 3 years. And I think this is where I think your planning process is only there to make sure the planning gets done. So at this point, I don't really care if it's an ICS-based planning process or not, as long as we meet our planning objectives. And the last thing is that all funding is distributed through agency budgets. So from time to time, a subcommittee will say, well, we should probably take this protective measure. And then you'll look around the interagency and say, well, who could do that? And then there will be some like gentle finger pointing where the guard will say, they should do that. And someone else will say, but the guard should do that. And that is where this process sometimes gets a little bit of friction to it. It's not a function of the service, it is a function of the planning process that happens. But it has gotten better and better, and I think that's really a function of the commitment of the Secret Service to evolve as they go. But the good news is there's one incident command post, right? So even though there's not a unified planning process, there's one incident command post, right? Right? There are lots of command posts. So you see 17 on here, but if you just add up, this is just for DC, just an example of a DC incident. But everybody I've talked to at the local level in the big cities who have done it basically run into the same process. Because what ends up happening is, and this is a big part of that your dance space, my dance space stuff, right? The service is focused on ensuring that that event goes off without a hitch, right? So a big part of the service's goal early in the planning process is to define the event perimeter. Not just the hard perimeter of the event, but the expanded perimeter of responsibility over which the special event has jurisdiction. Okay? I know there's a Secret Service agent somewhere in this room, so I'm not going to call him out, but just shout out, how many fire trucks do you have in the Secret Service? 0. How many ambulances do you have in the Secret Service?
0.
How many health departments? How many local health departments and disease epidemiology? The point is, right? The point is if, and this is again, this is a lesson learned for me. If you go into an NSSE planning process expecting the service to tell you how to do what needs to be done by the states and locals, you will be pissed off the entire time. And if you expect that they're going to provide you the resources, additional resources, to do what you need to do, you're going to be pissed off the entire time. If you go into it and you say, okay, this is my city, right? And this is the special event. And the service is we're going to work with the service such that inside of that special event, we're going to provide them all of those 32 functions of support as it's appropriate for the state and local to provide inside of that event perimeter. And then we're still going to be responsible for everything outside of that event perimeter. And they're not going to care as much about that because their full goal is to protect the basket of eggs, right? You will walk through this process and it will all make sense to you. I get the chance because I have a lot of friends and partners in other big cities, and when they get a national special security event, they'll sometimes call me and be like, the planning process doesn't make sense, I can't talk to the feds, I don't know what's going on. And when I explain that to them, that you are still in charge of your city is still in charge of your city, and you need to support the service with what they need so that they can execute a flawless event security plan inside of your city, but they're not going to help you fight a fire, a multi-alarm fire outside of that perimeter. They're not going to help you fight a multi-alarm fire inside of that perimeter either because they don't do firefighting. That's why there's a subcommittee of the NSSE for crisis management that the fire department, your fire department, sits on, right? So again, dance spaces. The problem with that is that you end up with this massive list of event, we call them EOCs, call them Department Operations Centers. The Secret Service calls it a MAC. They have their own centers. I said in other centers, they have like 6 other centers that they stand up, right? Sometimes they're a center within the center. Sometimes because of space, they're not. You have your federal agency command centers. Sometimes you have event command posts. So for the Super Bowl, there is an event command post at the stadium, right? Then, because it was designated an NSSE, there's a MAC, a multi-agency communication center, which if you're an ICS and NIMS purist, is not the same as a multi-agency coordination center. But sometimes they're doing the same things, but they're not the same thing because one is a services term and one is a NIMS term, right? You have all of your federal agency command centers. So when we stand up, we have sometimes the National Response Coordination Center will stand up because it's in DC and because FEMA headquarters is headquartered there too. But we'll also have our regional coordination center stand up, right? And then you have your state emergency operations and command centers, and since we're awesome and are both a city and a county but not a state at the same time, we have a number of our own centers. But if you're in California, the State Emergency Operations Center and maybe a regional coordination center will stand up. And then you have your city centers, right? And so all of these functions, whether that's 311, 911, or if you have a real-time crime center, if you have a fire operations center, you have an emergency operations center, maybe like we did for President Carter's funeral and the inauguration last year, our snow command center was stood up, right? We have 5 hospital command centers. They're supported by a health emergency command center. All of this is totally normal and inherent in our jurisdiction if you just take 1 through 4 off. But now you're adding more on. And that means that information flow can be really, really challenging. And I will tell you that there will never be one operations center in any incident, whether it's an NSSE or not, right? Our modern Homeland Security, our modern emergency management system, emergency services system in this country has matured to the point where there is no one operations center. At a minimum, every community has a 911 center. Some communities run incident support for incident command from their 911 center. Some have a conference room that becomes their EOC. Some have dedicated EOCs, right? We have business EOCs. We have a whole bunch of business EOCs that we coordinate through our Business Emergency Operations Center, which is a center within our center, right? The takeaway, though, is that we have to continue to invest in reliable, rugged, resilient, interoperable communication systems because those systems are what actually knit our people and our systems together to share information. And at the end of the day, this runs on information, right? Because at every center, they're supporting a group of people who are basically fundamentally operating under their own SOPs. When something goes bang or a change needs to be made, most of our public safety agencies have distributed authority down to the lowest level because that's the closest to the problem, right? But these centers that are resourcing them and coordinating information, they need information up, they need information down to them, and they need information across at all levels. And the service has a really good system for this. It's not perfect, it's pretty good, but this is an area where I think we just as a nation need to contribute to continue to invest, and we have to find ways to break down barriers between the private sector and the public sector. 5 other nuggets, 1 slide, then I'm done and we're doing questions. One is, I cannot stress to you the importance of leaders' intent. The National Special Security Event Designation gives the clearest command intent for event security in any environment I've ever seen, right? And because of that, it just addresses so many issues. 2 is, you cannot over-communicate in this environment. I talked about the MAC and the MAC, right? We call, in emergency management, traditionally in ICS and NIMS, we call the MAC a multi-agency coordination center. The service term MAC is multi-agency communication center, right? They call it a MAC. We use the term, for a long time I used the term interchangeably too, but then I really dug into what the service's goal is for the MAC. It really is to communicate information operationally between centers and people, and they have other centers that handle different aspects of that, which leads me to this, which is whether you're in an NSSE or not, you just have to ask the right question because we all have the same goal. We all want safe, secure events so that our community will continue to convene and celebrate. The Secret Service has a 0.0. If there were a way to make this negative, it would be, I would put a negative up here. They have a 0.0% risk tolerance when it comes to national special security events, okay? Which means they will walk through walls to secure an event. They will spend almost any amount of money. They will bring in whatever resources they need to secure an event. That is not reasonable for most events. And that is the limitation between the time commitment, the cost, and everything. That is why national special security events, as effective as they are, cannot be the solution. They just can't be the solution, right? But the lessons we learn, implemented locally, and with a risk dial that's dialed differently, can be really effective. And that's really what this presentation and you all were here to start talking about is, I want to figure out how we can take some of those lessons learned and apply them, but note and understand and accept and get commander's intent for a risk tolerance that's dialed up. Because not every event can have a 0.0% risk because we can't afford it or it won't happen, right? We got to have the eggs. We got to have the eggs for dinner. You cannot get past the importance of partnership on this. There's just too many agencies that have resources to do this. But the other side of this is it's really easy to forget how many resources you have in your home communities, either at the interlocal agency or at the state level. We're really fortunate in the National Capital Region. We have a ton of mutual aid and automatic aid built into long-standing mutual aid agreements because of a plane crash that happened 30 years ago. And it's easy to take that for granted and forget that there's probably someone in your community that you can call and ask to help you with counter UAS or UAS spotting or overwatch on your buildings or health surveillance. And I just can't stress enough the importance of prevention and protection. So with that, I leave you with this. I'm going to leave it up. You can take a picture. It'll be in the presentation deck that you get. But here are basically 10 steps that NSSTs teach us for any event that you're welcome to take with you. If you come up with something or you think one of these is dumb, by all means, hit me up on LinkedIn or email and tell me that. I'm not going to go through them, but effectively, this is the distilled takeaways from this entire presentation. The one thing I will say, and I didn't sort of like hammer this, is I think the other thing that this process has taught me is the importance of red teaming and checking your assumptions, right? If you put a plan together, that plan is only as good as the assumptions that it's built on. The assumption that, and there's sort of an unspoken assumption that nothing will happen at my event if I do all these things. But we don't control the weather, right? We don't control bad actors. We don't control people who get gorked out of their minds on methamphetamines and drive into a crowd. We don't control any of those things, right? So I think as you think about, special events in your community, which are the lifeblood of a lot of our communities economically, it's really important from time to time to red team your assumptions. And by red team, all I mean is take all of the prevailing assumptions that your planning is based on and step outside of those and say, okay, what if this one fails? What if this one fails? What if this one fails? And I was going to include it as a video, but my favorite example of this is the 10th Man segment of a movie called World War Z, which is a movie about zombies, where Brad Pitt is talking to a Mossad agent, and he says, how did you guys know that the zombies were coming and build a wall around Jerusalem? And he said, well, we have a rule, which is that when you're in a group of 10 and 9 are in alignment, one has to, as part of the planning process, step aside and take the contrary position to check the assumptions. And I think that's a really powerful lesson. I learned it most acutely on January 6th, 2021, but we've been applying it pretty consistently on our big special events, and that's really where our rehearsal of concepts and exercise process has gotten much stronger. So that's one thing I didn't spend a lot of time on in here, but if you'd like to talk about it either this afternoon or offline, I'm happy to discuss more. That's it.